right, folks, welcome into Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at BetOnline. I am your host, Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I am here. I am ready post All-Star break to talk about your Denver Nuggets. We'll get into a variety of different discussions today, some big picture discussions for sure, both about the league, All-Star break, things like that, but specifically about the Nuggets and where they are as a team. How good are they actually? I wrote some things over at Mile High Sports and for the Locked On newsletter that's going to come out in a bit, just about some interesting kind of topics relating to how good Denver is actually, how good they need to be post All-Star break, things like that. What do they need to prove in order to show that they can win an actual championship? Should be fun. I'm excited to get into it all. Thank you for stopping by. If you are here on YouTube, make sure to follow Mile High Sports on YouTube. And if you're interested in listening on the audio side of things, you can go over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, things like that. Wherever you get your podcast, basically, there should be a distribution for Pickaxe and Roll. Just search Pickaxe and Roll wherever you get podcasts. Once again, I'm your host, Ryan Blackburn. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Had a good All-Star break. We've got Cedric in the house who says, I think so. I'm assuming in response to the title of the podcast, are the Denver Nuggets legit title contender in NBA playoffs? DJ M is here. Any news on Vlatko? Nothing updated from before the All-Star break. My guess is that, so Denver's not practicing today. They will practice going like on Wednesday, and then we'll get to see them play on Thursday. I guess that somebody will ask about Vlatko tomorrow, and we'll probably get an update as to whether he's back in practice gear or if he's just kind of sitting on the side. We'll figure that out right quick. But I wouldn't be too concerned. I need to see Vlatko kind of go through the process before watching him get back onto the court. So I think that's going to take some time still. Before we go any further, got to pay some bills. This podcast, as you know, it's brought to you by the good folks over at BetOnline, who are your number one source for everything online betting in 2025, whether you're a seasoned fan, a first-time bettor, whatever. BetOnline has your ultimate game day companion. They're the largest selection of odds on everything from football, not football anymore, excuse me, the NBA, college basketball, NHL, UFC, everything is on BetOnline. All you have to do is stop by. Make sure to check out their website, betonline.ag, to get started. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, let's get into this thing. I wanted to kind of warm us up by talking about All-Star break, All-Star weekend. Denver needed this All-Star break. Ryan needed this All-Star break for sure. But when you start to get into the throes of it and you start to, I don't know if anybody else felt this way. My intention was not to watch anything this All-Star break, but I was also interested in some of the format stuff and how they were going to run some things, what it was going to look like. So I checked out some of the Rising Stars game with Julian Strawther. He played reasonably well. Wouldn't say he was awesome, but he played reasonably well in that. I checked out some of the All-Star festivities with Jokic. He was not awesome. He is not built for this kind of game. When he is Jokic, I like to say this when talking about Jokic's effort. When he is not giving at least 90% effort, he looks worse than some other players not giving 90% effort because he's just not athletic enough to kind of make up the gap. A lot of these other guys can just kind of hop, skip, and jump their way into athletic plays on the basketball court. Jokic he's always kind of lumbering around a little bit, doing his thing. But that's okay. It's not a big deal. But what was a big deal for the NBA community this past weekend, was just how ugly so much of the festivities were from a broadcasting standpoint, from just a timing standpoint, what the NBA was trying to do, what they were putting together. I think in theory, if the players bought in, if the broadcasting bought in, I think the format was okay. I won't say that it was awesome. The 3-point contest was a dud. The slam dunk contest was both good and bad because you had great stuff from Mac McClung, who outdunked a whole bunch of actual NBA players. Like not exactly not exactly super enticing for the NBA product. It's like Mac McClung at this point is closer to a professional NBA dunker than he is to impacting an actual NBA basketball game. And there's some disassociation there with the rest of the audience. Nobody really cared about Steph Castle and Mataz Buzelis and gosh, who else was even there? Who was the other guy who was there? I don't even remember. Um, I don't remember. But either way, that dunk contest, like Mac McClung made some great dunks. He had some really impressive dunks. That was about it. The 3-point contest was horrible. The skills competition is always horrible, despite the fact that Chris Paul and Victor Wembanyama tried to cheat the system. That's actually funny to me, but like nobody cared. Nobody actually cared about any of that stuff. The Rising Stars was good. That was probably the most competitive aspect of the entire thing, especially when the G League guys were really pushing some of the other Rising Stars. And then the All-Star game happened on Sunday, or the three different games. And the first one between the Rising Stars and the OGs was apparently pretty good, according to most people. The one that featured Jokic and the other, like, young guns, I think was the NBA term. I was fine. It was whatever. It was okay. But then the last one happens, and they take this massive break in the middle between the international stars and the OGs, Team Shaq and Team Chuck. And you just watch it, and I was driving at one point, and my brother and I were following along the game on our phone, not like visually, but just like tracking the box score. And it was 11-1 for like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And we were both wondering, did the box score break or something? No, they just decided to take a 20-minute break right in the middle of it, which is insane. That's just an insane thing to do. And we're all good. I saw Kevin Durant comment on this yesterday, I think. Like, people are just going to complain. They're going to complain all the time because that's what people want to do. They just want to complain. They don't want to care about the basketball. I don't know, man. I think that's a little bit off the wall because I look at this and then I look in parallel at what the NHL did, where they effectively took what was a failing format for the NHL and they turned it into a nations game, like where basically it was USA versus Canada on the night that everything else was going on Saturday night for the NBA. And I turned away and I watched that. I thought that was great. I thought it was pretty impressive where you showed how much people cared. You show how much the players cared about that one. Obviously, Finland and Sweden were also involved in it. That would have been less enticing to as many people because there were fewer stars in those games than there are in USA versus Canada. But it was still very interesting to watch and like kind of juxtaposed with how much they care. They're fighting on the ice as opposed to what was happening in the NBA, where it's just like, all right, we're gonna take a whole bunch of breaks. Kevin Hart's gonna MC. We're gonna make a whole bunch of jokes, and it's just not a thing. I don't know. Like, Pinball Addict says it here. We want an all-star game like they played in the 90s. And I think there is a misconception kind of modern, like in the modern time, like it's not like those guys went super hard. They didn't go super hard all the time, but there was just a level of seriousness that those players took in a game like this, where you get the best of the best coming together and you play hard, and you just don't have that anymore. And Matt Moore and I were talking about this on Sunday night. It's just because the players make too much money now, and there's just so much at stake that nobody's going to go super hard in a game that doesn't matter. And so I understand that, but the only way that anybody is ever going to take All-Star seriously anymore is if the players start to amp it up. I think they did try to start amping it up, but as the Stone Shooter says here, that 20-minute break just killed that game. It was very oddly timed. And I totally agree. Completely agree. And a lot of it was because TNT was trying to show off what they have done and like really give credit to Shaq, Kenny, and Charles. Like, which is funny because like you're honoring those guys, but then they're gonna be on ESPN next year. Like that's where Inside the NBA is going. They're gonna be on ESPN. And so, look, I understand wanting to honor people. I understand wanting to celebrate, but this wasn't a celebration of the NBA. This was a caricature of what the NBA is supposed to be. And it's just very annoying to watch this. I don't know what can be done. And I said here, what can be done about All Star? I don't know. Like everything that they try is met with resistance. They used to play the Elam ending, but then like that was initially very, very competitive. One of the most competitive times of this millennium that they like the players actually cared when that happened. It was right after Kobe's death. And so I think that that was part of the reason why. But since then, the Elam ending became less and less appealing to people. When you have guys like Anthony Edwards who are just taking the weekend off, and you have Kevin Hart hosting, and Jokic just like Nuggets fans, like part of his like why Nuggets fans love him so much is because he doesn't care about certain things, but he clearly doesn't care about the All-Star game, and he's part of the problem here. Just as there are so many. LeBron, he graciously took the invite from the NBA and like hung out around the thing and then decided, you know what, I'm not going to play in the All-Star game. Not gonna do that. And that was pretty disrespectful too. So the players don't care. They don't care about this weekend. They're never going to care about this weekend. Kevin Durant can complain all he wants about other people complaining. People don't care. And I think this was probably the straw that broke the camel's back. Adam Silver's been trying a lot of different things, and it's not working. It's just not looking good for what the NBA All-Star game is. So if I were them, I would try to revamp the whole thing. I would continue to play. Like, I think the theory of different teams playing to 40, I would up it to 50. I think that theory is pretty good. I wouldn't like interrupt the final game of the weekend for 20 minutes for no reason at all. I would continue doing something like that. I would try to instill some sort of horse tournament or something equivalent where you have the best shooters shooting and doing crazy things. There's a part of me that wants to see what they would do in a 3-on-3 situation where you just break the 24 All-Stars that are playing into 8 different 3-on-3 teams that each play to 11 and see which team can win. And just play like half court, like nothing too crazy full court wise. And I would do things like that. That would be, I think, more interesting to people. And then if that doesn't work, then I would do USA versus World. I would just say, hey, we're going to assemble the best world team that we possibly can. We're going to revamp the way that All-Stars are picked. You're going to get the 12 best world players and the 12 best USA players. And those are going to be the teams. And you're going to play till 100 or whatever. And that's how the All-Star break goes. That would be my guess as to what would actually get the players going a little bit. But either way, like Weisberg says it here, there will be more seriousness to it. There just has to be more seriousness to it. He actually says, I disagree. I think most guys 27 and under give a damn. Wemby cares. Tatum cares. He's actually got the scoring record in both formats. Once the old guys get out of here, I firmly agree. Like, it is funny. Like, I can also complain about the way that Steph Curry was managed in this All-Star game or in this All-Star weekend. He should have been the ambassador for the entire thing, and he didn't do anything on Saturday night. He wasn't even in the 3-point contest. That 3-point contest was a joke. It was so horrible. And I know they tried to do some stuff with Sabrina Ionescu or whoever in the WNBA, and it just didn't work. But like Steph not being involved at all, really, other than that, is crazy. So kind of wild. Not sure what they can do, not sure what they want to do. But the fact is that nobody wants to watch what they're currently doing. And I don't know whether that changes. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we are going to discuss the Denver Nuggets. We're going to get back to Nuggets stuff. I said my piece on All-Star break. Let me know in the comments, by the way, what you would do to change the All-Star, change the All-Star break. What would be your ideal thing to watch? Or maybe it's just like players actually caring about the All-Star break, about the All-Star game, or the slam dunk contest, or whatever. That would be such a novel concept. We'll be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we are back. Pickaxe and Roll, Ryan Blackburn here. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Would really, really appreciate it. Thanks for hanging out with me on a Tuesday morning. For full posterity, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. That's what my schedule is going to be for this upcoming week. Not going to do anything on Saturday or Sunday. I'm going to kind of maintain my All-Star break a little bit and just do one fewer show than what I would normally do. Next week, we will be on a full regular schedule, probably trying to do the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday thing as often as possible, or we'll just react to what the schedule is. But for this week, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. So keep that in mind. All right, let's get back to the Nuggets. I put out an article this morning, and I thought it was a freaking good one. I went pretty long. Put in a lot of time to that one on Mile High Sports. And make sure to go check it out. It's basically just how good are the Nuggets actually? Like how good are they? What do they look like? And how do they compare to the previous 2 years? If people remember, the Nuggets looked like in the first couple months or like six weeks of the season in the championship year, they were meh. They were they were fine. They were good, but they weren't looking special. And then in December, January, and February, they took off, just absolutely rolled people. And it was pretty interesting to watch. It was pretty interesting to see them kind of turn it up, and it looked great. And then when March and April hit, they took their foot off the gas. They were up by so much in the Western Conference playoff picture that they did not have to worry about what was going on and what it looked like. And then last year, they started pretty hot. Then Murray got hurt. Then they struggled. And then Murray came back and they played better. And then Murray got hurt and they struggled. And that cycle kind of hit, but they were pretty good throughout the year. They were pretty good. And they won 57 games. They won 4 more in addition than they had the previous year. But they gassed themselves out. They really tried very hard. And I'll talk about the gassing out aspect of it in the third segment. But what I want to talk about right now is just how good the Nuggets actually are this year. So I've got some numbers to bring up to people. Here we go. This is a comparison between the 3 years. This is the championship year, 2022-23, 2023-24, last year when they were looking good but didn't ultimately win. And then this year. If you look at the net rating, SRS, which is simple rating system on Basketball Reference, and then EPM is estimated plus minus on dunks and threes. All 3 of those are different ways of measuring your point differential, how much you're winning games by, against the strength of schedule that you're playing. Net rating doesn't impact strength of schedule. SRS really does. EPM kind of smooths it out. Isn't like it takes the data, but really kind of adjusts by schedule throughout the year. 2022-23, Denver was kind of in the 6-7 range in the regular season. They were not a great regular season team. Part of that was because they did not care after March 2nd or so. They had a full 5 weeks that they did not try that hard. And that definitely dragged them down. They were looking higher than that, like in the 3-4 range for much of that year. Last year, they were pretty good across the board. They were fourth. They weren't top. They weren't the top team. Like Boston was clearly the top team. They ultimately won the title. OKC and Minnesota were second and third, respectively. This year, Denver is sixth, fifth or sixth, pretty much across the board there. They are pretty good, but not elite. They are not quite in that elite tier in each of those categories. Now, the graph below that I'm showing is Denver Nuggets performance by opponent. Their win percentage versus plus 500 teams, their win percentage versus sub 500 teams, and then their individual net ratings on cleaning the glass against teams that rank in the top 10, the middle 10, or bottom 10 of point differential. And those share, I think, an interesting perspective. In the championship year, Denver's win percentage versus plus 500 teams was very good. 61.7% is very good. Denver this year is sub 500 in those categories. So they're not as good. Like, they're still better than most other teams because it's really hard to be very good against plus 500 teams. But they weren't quite at the level this year that they were either of the previous 2 years, but most certainly the championship year. Now, where the Nuggets have been better this season is kind of taking care of business against the teams that are like them or just below them in that middle tier. And they actually haven't been as good this year against the bottom. Like, Denver's lost games against Washington. They lost games against New Orleans. Portland, they've lost a game against. Their win percentage is good in those cases, but Denver's actually, like, their overall level of performance, they're not dominating those games often. There are times where they are. They're actually dominating the games against the middle class of the NBA, which is very fascinating. But they're not quite awesome all the way around. Now, why I bring these numbers up and what I've really tried to push forward in my article, and I've got some more numbers that I'll bring up in just a second. Denver's a really good team, but they're finding ways to be good in some different ways. In my mind, teams that shine against the sub 500 teams are the serious, like, regular season teams. They're the teams that are very good against most teams. And then when you're facing against the best of the best, then it's a little bit of a different story. You know what teams call those? Like, they call them paper tigers. They call them regular season warriors in those kinds of teams, those kinds of situations. I don't think Denver is a regular season warrior. Like, they don't meet that criteria in terms of, like, the actual look. Like, they've got Jokic. They've got a championship core. They've got a group that has been and won the finals before. But what they don't have is, like, that ultra top gear against the best of the best, which you would expect a team like Denver to have, but they just have not been as good against the top teams. Now, post All-Star break, they play a bunch of games in a row against playoff teams. So that will probably shift one way or the other. Like, is Denver going to be just as good? Are they going to be worse? Are they going to improve in some of those situations? I don't know. But I do think we're gonna find out. Because right now, at this point, the Nuggets have a 7-13 record versus teams ranked in the top 10 in point differential on cleaning the glass. So a little bit different from the ESPN stat, but Denver's got a 7-13 record in those cases. That's not good enough. That's not what you would expect for a team that wins a championship. Now, Matt Moore and I have gone back and forth about this. It doesn't mean that you can't win. But when you have questions about a team, you want to see how they perform against the top teams in the NBA. Denver has not been good enough in those situations. So I'm looking forward to seeing whether they can improve. Now, the next slide over here, it's a little bit small. Apologies for that. Denver Nuggets net ratings in Nikola Jokic lineups. The long and short of that, and I'm sorry that it doesn't show up that much bigger. The long and short of that graph is that in 2022-23, 2023-24, and 2024-25, Denver is effectively the exact same team. The exact same. There are no questions. Like the highest net rating between any team or between any duo was the plus 17.5 in 2023 between Christian Braun and Nikola Jokic. I think at this point that you're seeing a lot of the similar stuff. You're seeing a lot of the similar things where Jokic and the Nuggets are a double-digit positive when he is on the floor. And when he's not on the floor, you're just kind of piecing some things together. I remember back during that championship run that the Bruce Brown minutes, you know how we're all very excited about what Bruce Brown brought, but the actual numbers behind it were pretty shaky because if you look at the Bruce column on the left side, plus 11.2 when he's on the floor with Jokic, minus 11.9 when he's not out there with Jokic. He wasn't affecting things positively when Jokic was off the floor. And there were a lot of questions heading into the playoffs about what are the Nuggets going to do? And then they figured it out. It was Bruce Brown, Jeff Green, and Christian Braun, and they kind of mixed and matched, and Jamal Murray was so good in those playoffs, and Aaron Gordon played the backup five, and they did a lot of great things, and they made it work. This year, I think it's a lot the same thing. Like Russell Westbrook, I think, is a very great approximation of Bruce Brown. Plus 13.3 with Jokic, minus 20.7 without him. Like, how are they going to survive? What are they going to do? Like, how are they going to handle it? Well, they might be able to handle it. They might not be able to handle it, but we won't really know until they get there, until they're being faced with these issues. How are they going to handle those moments? How are they going to handle what happens when teams are game planning for them? Fortunately for Denver in that year, Denver was able to game plan, and they were able to game plan pretty well. In the 2022-23 playoffs, the Nuggets had a plus 4.0 net rating in the minutes that Jokic did not play. Plus 4.0 is crazy, given what you know about Jokic and what you know about the Nuggets. Last year, the Nuggets had a minus 11.8 net rating in the minutes with Jokic off the floor. So they went back to what they normally were, and that really affected things. Of course, the big difference there was that when Jokic was on the floor last season in the playoffs, the Nuggets net rating was plus 0.7, just above average. And it got me kind of going down the line of the Nuggets really do go as the Jokic minutes go. Like everybody knows that, but nobody's really done those numbers like to the degree that I'm going to do now. 2022-23, the Nuggets went 45-6 when Jokic won his minutes. They went 16-2 in the playoffs. 2023-24, the Nuggets went 53-10 in the regular season when Jokic won his minutes and 7-0 in the playoffs last year. They were 7-0 in games when he won his minutes and 0-5 in minutes when he did not. Pretty clear, like pretty understandable. This year, 2024-25, the Nuggets are 30-5 when Jokic is a plus, and they are 4-10 in games where he is not a plus, and they are 2-4 in games when he didn't play. So that seems pretty standard. Like people, like they think about that and they often think, okay, well, yeah, if Jokic wins his minutes, then Denver's probably going to win. You're right. But it's even more stark for a team like Denver. They are 3-30. They've won 3 games out of 33 in the playoffs when Jokic has a net neutral or a negative plus minus. Net neutral or negative. 3 times in his entire career. So Denver's they have to make the Jokic minutes work. It is a requirement that those are positive. Whatever Denver does, whatever they have to do, whether they play Russell Westbrook next to him, or they play Christian Braun next to him, or if they play less Aaron Gordon and more Michael Porter at the 4, let's say they play more Peyton Watson on the perimeter, whatever they decide to do, they have to be good enough in the Jokic minutes. Because at the end of the day, it's only 8 minutes that he doesn't really play. Like, he's averaging about 40 minutes per game in his playoff career. He's going to play about 40. The question is the 8 minutes that he does not play. Or no, that's not the question. Like, the 40 minutes that he does play matter way more than the 8 minutes that he doesn't. Denver can overcome some bad minutes without him. They can't overcome what happens like if they don't generate a lead when he's out there. And that's what the Timberwolves were able to do last year. They were able to sink the Jokic minutes. And it's not his fault. Like, there were a lot of circumstances around him that made it difficult. But they built a perfect team, Minnesota did, to really affect what the Nuggets were doing. So, circling back to the top of this thing, just how good are the Nuggets? How good are they this year compared to previous years? I think they're about exactly the same. Just kind of going through things, looking through things, asking some different questions. The way that they get to places is different. Like, they're a little bit different from the perspective of, okay, they're going to be better against the middle of the pack versus the top, like the bottom teams or the top teams. Or I don't know, like they're probably gonna just have about the same amount of strength. But what it's actually going to look like in the playoffs is ultimately going to be determined by how good is Jamal Murray, how good is Michael Porter, can Aaron Gordon handle what he's going to be asked to handle, and can the Nuggets kind of fill in the gaps? Because the actual rotation in theory is about what it's supposed to be. It's not going to be anything crazy. It's really not. I think that Denver's in an interesting position here. I don't know what they're actually going to look like, but I do think that there's some stuff like that they can prove in the post All-Star break stretch, and what they're going to actually look like should be fascinating to see. Like, everything that they've shown tells me that they're about the same. It took them a while this year to kind of get to that place, but they are back. They're back to where they need to be. The question is whether they're going to build upon that, or whether they're going to gas out, or whether they're just going to kind of falter. We'll see what happens. All right, let's take another break. When we come back, going to wrap up with what to expect post All-Star break. I have a prediction. I think the Nuggets are going to win exactly 18 games. We'll be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, final segment, Pickaxe and Roll. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Wanted to get something up here really quickly, but I'm going to talk right now about the other article that I put together over this weekend. Something up on the Locked On Network for the newsletter that they're doing. I am curious to see how Denver handles this post All-Star break section, because we have some evidence in previous seasons. Like, it's not perfect necessarily, but we do have some evidence of, like, hey, they could probably stand to take their foot off the gas when it comes to late March and then into April. We've seen what it looks like when they go all the way through, when they gas themselves out. Last year, they were 36-19 at this time, and they went 21-6. And then they lost game 81, and it didn't really matter what they did. They were still the 2 seed. They didn't earn the 1 seed. They still had to figure out, okay, how are we going to beat the Minnesota Timberwolves? And they failed. They got caught with a tough stretch, a tough series against the Lakers that it only went 5, but all those games were pretty stressful. And then Denver, of course, had to run up against a team that matches up with them extremely well. So for all the effort that Denver put in, had they just dropped to the 3 seed, they would have faced the Phoenix Suns in the first round. And they would have they would have gone on the road to face Minnesota. They would have been in the exact same place because they lost 3 home games to Minnesota. So, did they really need any of those like extra home games? No, they probably didn't. So it's going to be interesting to see how Denver handles it this year. The previous season, of course, everybody knows Denver won a big game against the Memphis Grizzlies in early March. That effectively clinched the number 1 seed for them. They were so far ahead of everybody. They were like 9 games ahead of everybody else that they shut it down. And there was a lot of people that worried about, okay, why do they look like they're going through the March lull, the April, like they're not necessarily playing that hard. They're not playing that well. Should we be worried? No. They didn't care at that point. And it was pretty clear that they were just gearing up for the playoffs. And they were physical, and they were able to like really go into the playoffs full tilt. They weren't able to do that last year. And when they did, they just got tired. They just got gassed out. So curious to see how people react when I say that the Nuggets should win exactly 18 games. They won 21 the previous year. They showed that they could like really go on a run. You want to see them play hard. You want to see them play well. And if they win if they win 17 games and they go 17-10, it's not going to be crazy either. But I think 18-9 for the post All-Star break schedule that's a pretty good number. That's a pretty good record to have, especially given the stuff that they're going to face. Because here is the standings right now. Denver's 36-19. Houston is 34-21, right under them. The premise here is that Denver's not going to be able to get to the 1 seed. OKC is too far gone. They have an 8.5 game lead, 9 games in the loss column. Denver's not catching them. So how does Denver respond? Do they need the 2 seed? Not really. You think about, okay, so where's Minnesota right now? Minnesota's at the 7. They're probably the toughest matchup for Denver in the playoffs outside of OKC. Maybe that changes. Maybe Denver struggles with some other teams as well. But I think that Denver can find a way to win against all the other teams. But they're probably going to face somebody pretty tough. They're probably going to have to match up with somebody. And so the question is, how hard do you have to work? Do you want to be the 2 seed so you can guarantee that you get 2 home rounds in the playoffs? I don't know. Denver's 19-8 at home. They're 17-11 on the road. They are not that much better at home. This is not a situation like it was last year where they felt like, hey, we are dominating teams at home. We want to be at home. And then it didn't ultimately matter. They knew how much home court mattered in the previous season, but I'm not sure it really did that much. There's a lot to me it's a little bit shaky about how they actually handled that. Either way, I don't think that Denver needs to be the 2. My premise in the other article that I did was I think they just need to be in the top 4. And if Houston passes them and Denver drops down to 4, then okay. You'd rather be on the opposite side of OKC. You'd rather have a couple of teams try to take a crack at OKC, see if they could defeat them. And if so, then great. But if not, okay, Denver, they still have a top 4 seed. They still have home court advantage in a first round series. And then you play after that point. But if Denver goes 18-9, that's the perfect number that I have here, 18-9. Then they get to 54 wins. That means that Houston would have to go at least 20-7 to match them. And they'd have to go 21-6 like Denver did last year to pass Denver in the standings. And I think, okay, if that's fine, if you want to do that, then great. If you want to do that, then that's fine. I don't necessarily feel like Denver has to try to stay above anybody. If they can, then if they want to, then sure. If Houston really wants to try to move into the top 3, if the Lakers, for example, really want to move into the top 3, then fine, whatever. For what it's worth, the Lakers have only played 52 games, so they'd have to go 22-10 in order to get to where Denver would be at 54 wins. So I think 54 wins is about the right barometer which means Denver's got to try, but they don't have to win every single game. They got to win 2 out of every 3. And so you kind of gear up for the games that you want to try to win. You try to earn some of those wins earlier. Let's say you go on another 10-game win streak, or like Denver's on an 8-game win streak right now. Let's say you win 10 of your next 12. All right, that's great. 10 out of, like, you go 10-2. That means you have to go 8-7 the rest of the way in order to make it happen. So I think that it's very important to avoid the burnout. I think it's very important to lock in as best as possible. And I think it'll be interesting to see how they handle this, how they handle this moment for themselves. Because last year, I think it was a pretty clear thing that they were gassed out. Will they be as gassed out this year? No. I think that Jamal looks healthier. Knock on wood. Jokic looks pretty good, obviously. Aaron Gordon looks a little bit hampered. Maybe this All-Star break will be good for him. We'll have to ask him tomorrow. And there's some things that they can go into. But I really do think that Denver should be trying to win enough games that they stay above the fold, stay in the top 4 in the West. But you don't win too many games that you're actually stressed about getting a certain seed at this point. Because if you're not getting the 1, then what are you really fighting for? Denver's already shown that if they go on the road, they can win. They showed that against Minnesota. They won 2 out of the 3 road games in Minnesota. They lost 3 out of the 4 home games. That was the issue. Last thing I want to show. Sorry that this isn't like my face doesn't show up on here. I did this. This is the top 8 of every rotation in the entire NBA, sorted by net rating. The premise of this graphic, I'll take it off screen just now. Lineups where 5 of the top 8 players in a team's expected playoff rotation are on the floor. I wanted to put this together because there's been a lot of changes. There's been a lot of adjustments. How are teams responding? What are they looking like? And what does Denver look like if you kind of trim the fat off of their rotation? If you say, hey, we're not going to play DeAndre Jordan. We're not going to play Dario Saric. We're not going to play Zeke Naji, Jalen Pickett. We're just going to play the top 8. That's Denver starters plus Russell Westbrook, Peyton Watson, Julian Strawther, the expected top 8 of the rotation. And this is what it looks like. If you sort this by net rating, these are the top 9 teams. They're almost all in the Western Conference, by the way, which is crazy. Golden State, that is a small sample size. For the Lakers, that is a small sample size. For Dallas, that is a small sample size. Everything else is a little bit more adjusted. Cleveland, that includes DeAndre Hunter, or the minutes that wouldn't include DeAndre Hunter, so they'll probably adjust. They'll still be very good. Memphis is obviously very good. Oklahoma City, obviously very good. Denver is in that general tier, though. They're not so far off of the fold there that it's not possible for them to upset things. But what this shows is that when other teams go to their playoff rotations, they are still going to be pretty good too. It's not just Denver that gets to benefit from cutting out the 9th man or 10th man or whoever. They'll still have to contend with a bunch of other teams. What's interesting about that graphic, by the way, nothing too crazy. Boston is not in the top 10. They're actually at plus 4.7 net rating because so many of their positive minutes are tied to Luke Cornett and Neemias Queta and some of their other fringe bigs. When Kristaps Porzingis is on the floor for them, they have a plus 2.7 net rating, despite the fact that they're very good. They're a very talented team. So kind of fascinating to see that there are some things that show up. Might be some weakness in Boston, especially when it comes to their bigs. Or you could expect Kristaps to be better, and they'll just figure it out. I don't know. We'll find out. But either way, I think that there are some things for Denver to think about. There are some things for the Nuggets to evaluate over the course of these next 15 to 20 games or so. After those 15 to 20 games, they got to shut it down. They got to do what's best for them. They got to do what's best for their long-term health. And if they could get the 3 seed in the process, then great. If they get the 4 seed, is what it is. But I don't think it's that much of a difference to really be a big deal about. All right, everybody, I think that is going to do it for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll. Thank you for hanging out today. The chat was bumping. You guys were doing a great job in there, just having a ball. I really appreciate everybody for stopping by. Again, I'll be back on Thursday, kind of do a preview of the All-Star break, like post All-Star break schedule, like in actual detail. And we'll talk on Friday about Denver's first game against Charlotte. Hopefully that's a win. Hopefully they continue their winning streak. That would be bad if that's the game that they lost it on. Knock on wood. Thank you so much for tuning into the show, everybody. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button on the way out. Would really, really appreciate it. I will talk to you guys on Thursday.